lead the drive to lower that. I certainly want to lead the drive to lower the carbon footprint of the entire state, and I want to work with you on something that I believe I can get behind when I believe I can get behind
That's
it.
wonderful. We'll show you the roadmap,
Okay.
and thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Back there.
Hi, Mr. Malloy.
Dan, I'm Dan, so what's your name?
Ham.
Okay.
Yeah, short for Hampton. I'm a member of the Yale Hunger and Homelessness Action Project. And for the past 2 years, since 2008, we've had to run 2 emergency funding drives because in 2008, the state sent less money to New Haven to fund an overflow shelter for the homeless here. And this year what happened is they're funding the shelter, but they cut funding for the rest of the other shelters. So we're going to have to do another emergency drive for the 3rd year in a row to fund emergency shelters. So I guess my question, it might be an economic question, it might be just a social justice question, but is when are we going to get more Connecticut state money to fund the homeless shelters so that we don't have to have an emergency drive every year?
Yeah, it's a fair question. You know, I think that we put extraordinary, well, this is really complicated. We put an extraordinary burden on local communities. And it comes at us from many different directions, not the least of which is Connecticut has failed to honor its promise as a deinstitutionalized and as we continue the process of closing mental health beds and addiction beds and treatment beds. So what we ended up doing over a long course was to end up with a lot more people living on the street. In many cases without the ability to turn their own lives around and without governmental resources to turn to help them turn their lives around. It's a very complicated area. The state of Connecticut has failed to honor its promises with our not-for-profit community and our community providers, of which there are about 300 under contract with the state of government. The state of Connecticut's government. Over a 20-year period, they have seen about a 1% increase per year in support versus the inflation rate, which is, you know, averaged easily 3.5 times that over that same period of time. Our general government, which has seen much larger increases on a yearly basis, far more reflective of, and actually greater than the inflation rate during that period of time. So this is a complicated issue. I'm looking at a $3.4 billion deficit in 1 month after I'm sworn in. I'm supposed to present a budget. What I have said is it is not my intention to balance that budget on the backs of those who are most dependent on state government for their existence. And I'm hopeful that I can do that. And that we will build support for greater support for shelters and making sure that food is available to individuals. I believe it to be a moral imperative, which is another way of saying that I believe that the way that our state government has treated these institutions and these community providers in the past is immoral. Yep.
Hi, my name is Mike. I'm the lobbying coordinator for the Yale College Dems. Under Governor Rell, we've seen a lot of great progressive legislation make its way through the General Assembly, some of it championed by our own Gary Holder Winfield, only to see it vetoed by a Republican governor. So I'm wondering, what are some of the things that you'd like to achieve working with our Democratic legislators in Hartford?
It's a great question. I mean, I think, you know, it all begins by putting our fiscal house in order and then expending monies in accordance with the agreed upon priorities, which I think have to be to a great extent driven around the idea of job creation and changing that which we have done in the past, which is defeating job creation, for instance, maintaining electric rates that are 76% greater than the national average. Having said that, you asked specifically about progressive legislation. We have a very progressive package of proposals, Nancy and I, on andMalloy.com. I invite you to go take a look at it. I spoke today to an education group. I intend to be an education governor. Education reform only works in a state if it's led by the governor. And you can study that across the board. Governors can't push somebody out front of them and say, get it done. They've got to be invested. So I think what you'll see is that I will be heavily invested in educational reformation in the state of Connecticut so that we no longer find it tolerable to fail or to have so many of our young people fail. There are lots of other areas of progressive legislation that I'd like to champion. And some of these things simply are stopping the process of cutting off our own nose to spite our face. For instance, we have failed to invest appropriately in affordable housing in this state. One of the reasons companies don't come to our state is the lack of affordable housing. We've got to rethink that priority. 20 years ago, when we had a Democratic governor, we were putting a substantial number of dollars into the creation of affordable housing. That has shrunk almost to nothing. That's another area that I'd like to see us address. There are lots of areas of progressive thought that I would like to move forward, but it all begins by putting our economic house in order, getting to a balanced budget where our revenues allow us to meet our expenditures, or our expenditures are cut to the point where we can afford them. One or the other, or some combination thereof. The idea of going to Wall Street to borrow money to cover operating cost is a mistake, and we should stop doing that as soon as we possibly and reasonably can. And then we need to be investing in this state in such a way that it is the kind of state that you and I would like to live here and continue to live here, or have our children or grandchildren live here. Yes?
My name's Brian. I'm with Elm City Cycling, as well as the Yale Dems and the Yale Student Environmental Coalition. In light of the President's proposal yesterday for a new model for funding transportation infrastructure, I was wondering what your plans are for reorienting the State Department of Transportation away from being was essentially a highway department interested in designing freeways and limiting state liability on other road projects, toward being in a place where it can be willing and capable of taking the lead on public transportation, rail infrastructure, and bicycle infrastructure projects moving forward.
So that's a great question. I'll say a couple of things. As a trustee of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, an area of disagreement I had with Barack Obama, President Obama, and his administration, is I didn't think they put enough into infrastructure. So I was happy to read this morning about the $50 billion proposal. And I think it's aimed at long-term investment. This is not simply let's fix an existing infrastructure. This is create new infrastructure. And I think that that's really what we have to do. And in the long run, $50 billion is probably not enough, but it is in the short run to begin that process. And what I will do is I will reshape Connecticut's DOT in such a way that we no longer fail to receive the kinds of grants that we are applying for. So in this round of Tiger grants, which were these get-to-work-quickly projects for long-term improvement in infrastructure, Connecticut failed to win any of the competitive Tiger grant money. And I think in large part because we had a DOT that was misguided, poorly led, and not well led by its governor as well. So we're going to have a very different DOT that's going to concentrate on things like long-term rail investment, as well as maintaining the road infrastructure as well to a higher degree. You know, my last year as mayor of Stamford, I put out there and continue to advocate on the reintroduction of trolley systems in places like New Haven, Bridgeport, Stamford, Hartford, Waterbury. I have a long-term vision of a light rail system that would in an arc fashion, connect many of the major educational institutions and job opportunities, current and future, in the state of Connecticut. What you're going to see is a much more mass transit-centric DOT if I become governor. Okay. Thank you. Yes?
Hi, I'm Marina Keegan. I'm the elections coordinator for the College Democrats. My question is, you're talking about all these new programs and initiatives that will be able to sort of start going on if we have a Democratic governor. But I guess I'm wondering realistically, you know, these programs aren't free. I'm wondering where you see cuts being made in the next 4 years, and what areas you see having to trim down in order to finance some of these programs.
Sure. Well, you know, I talk about the programs that I aspire to bring to the state of Connecticut, and I'm not going to stop talking about those. But I will also recognize that because of the downturn in the economy, some of these are longer-term goals than I'd like them to be. But if I don't tell you, and if I don't put on my website what I would like to see done, then you really can't measure what I'm trying to do. But it's a valid point. We're not going to be able to start everything we want to start year one or maybe even year 4 because we are living in this pressure cooker of an economy which has punished America, you know, to a very great degree. But then you asked, as a second part of that question, what needs to be cut? Waste needs to be cut. Duplication needs to be cut. There are about 230 state departments and agencies. And that's grown by a third over the last 20 years. We need to cut it by a third.